Hi everyone. Today my presentation will be discussing the Woodside gas development in Western Australia with the transdisciplinary method in mind. Through this paradigm, we can view the embedded conflict between stakeholders and how this creates complexity that exceeds the capability of the method. Despite this, the model can still be used to identify communication breakdowns and how to prevent future dysfunction. Woodside is currently a multinational energy company, providing 5% of the global liquid natural gas supply as of last year. They have drawn continued backlash for their Scarborough gas expansion since its approval in 2021 for commencement in 2026. There is a diverse range of stakeholders at hand, and that's what grants this case its complexity. There is Woodside and their majority stakeholder BHP collaborating with the state government to provide LNG to the global market. This is being protested by Greenpeace and other environmental activist groups, whilst local industries and communities are reliant on the project continuing in the short to medium term. The key communication breakdown has occurred due to a lack of consultation between the bodies and their subsequent incompatible prospects. This has resulted in incidences of public protest at a range of locations, including German gas-powered power plants, the proposed development site, and numerous demonstrations condemning Woodside. Greenpeace is protesting as the Earth's climate budget cannot absorb any new gas developments. However, Woodside must continue to supply gas to the markets as ceasing operations will halt business, and governments must consider energy security and the health of regional economies. This has embedded conflict between groups at the core of the case. Due to the scope and complexity of the many stakeholder interests of the case, it's arguably best practice for Woodside to have a comprehensive consultation program to ensure that these stakeholders are accounted for and their needs are incorporated to prevent backlash as currently being experienced. This is what leads us to the transdisciplinary approach. The transdisciplinary approach, or TD, refers to the co-development process where elements of the systems thinking are applied to the interests of parties involved in an outcome. In those terms, it's simply looking at everyone a decision affects and how the process can include their feedback, if not them directly. This framework is a response to the historical incidences where stakeholders have taken an adversarial stance to consultation, in which they feel like they're being dictated to and rather not included in the process. Thus, feedback through forums, consultations, surveys, consultants is now commonplace in larger complex projects like these. In this case, there are some examples of consultation between the stakeholders, including the mandatory government procedures for approval between Woodside and the state government, as well as the investment required for local communities and industries to ensure that the given area has infrastructure to cope with operations. But on top of this, Woodside have listed the fact that they have invested in the local community via fact sheets, approval timelines, and compliance reports. These are readily available, free and clear for anyone interested. Then on top of that is the PR work for them supporting local sports teams, cricket clubs, football groups, that kind of thing. But this is still insufficient. These actions have failed to quell backlash from across the board. The Australian Conservation Foundation has proceeded with a legal case as of June this year to the federal government for Woodside to cease development as their emissions can ultimately damage the Great Barrier Reef, a UNESCO World Heritage listed site. And on top of that, local Indigenous leaders have taken action to protect rock art from being exposed to pollution from the Pluto processing facility, which was onshore as depicted earlier. Woodside have dismissed these heritage claims as irrelevant, which has resulted in more heavy, widespread backlash. With negative feedback being incurred from an array of stakeholders, Woodside has continued to press forward with the development with disregards to environmental, Indigenous and community concerns. The use of the transdisciplinary consultation has been only superficial, despite consistent and diverse feedback. Thus, fault doesn't necessarily lie within the method, but rather the stakeholder, Woodside themselves. The success of the outcomes of the transdisciplinary method is dependent on the stakeholder. For Woodside, failing comprehensive consideration is ideal for operations, excluding the protests and the loss of goodwill. However, for all other people involved, it's clear net loss due to the implicated climate change of supplying the forecasted 8 million tonnes per annum, which will tip the global carbon budget further forward, as on the displayed graph. These conflicts under the provided framework are modelled as social environmental challenges for which TD requires decision makers to account for their incurred ethical dilemma, which their actions have a direct impact on the outcome. Again, lay's terms, Woodside has an ethical responsibility to the climate and humanity beyond their fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. The case demonstrates an extremely complex stakeholder embroilment, which depths surpass the powers of the transdisciplinary method, despite being used at several key phases by Woodside. Although actions were taken to incorporate feedback, it's still insufficient to address the concerns for environmental health. The key leverages in the case are time, money, resources, and people. If Woodside were to simply use their time earlier in the development to ensure people were accounted for, then the future goodwill and the communities on behalf of governments may not have diminished as heavily as they have. Although the project has allowed the business to recover from the pandemic-induced dip as of 2020, this decision-making may hold future unintended consequences that Woodside might not be able to account for currently, otherwise unmitigated potential future business risk. At its core, the case urges the importance of meaningful inclusion of groups through legitimate consultation and integration of their feedback into operations. And if that feedback is incompatible, then simply ignoring stakeholders, whether environmental organisations, Indigenous leaders, or community groups, is insufficient in all circumstances. Anyway, here's my questions. I'll have them up on the discussion board. Looking forward to discussing it with you. And there's my references for your consideration. Thank you very much.